We are in our last week of Genesis 1 to 11. This is a big deal. Number one, because congratulations, you made it through. This is our 10th week, so you made it through to the double digits of meeting weeks. Number two, it's special because I've been saying it over and over again, but Genesis 1 to 11, it's a unique section of the Bible, and it reads very unique in comparison to the rest of the Bible, and the subject matter is very unique in comparison to the rest of the Bible. It really is its own subsection, and it is a prologue to the story of the Bible. So, perfect example that I've given in this class is Lord of the Rings. If you've seen that movie and you have Galadriel's voice speaking at the beginning, that's what Genesis 1 to 11 is, right? What does Genesis 1 to 11 cover? What have we been saying? What's the one word that we would say it covers? Prehistory. Yeah, it covers prehistory. So the era of the world in creation prior to things being written down, and you could say prior to things really being in an archaeological timeline, especially because now that we have gotten post-flood in the story of the Bible, now is when these things start emerging that we have to the present day. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Same thing with writing. We are at the end of the flood. Really marks the transition period between this sort of prehistory era and then history. That's when we start having material post-flood, and all the material that we have cross-culturally is about the flood. So it's kind of funny how that works. The earliest material that we have, in writing is about these stories that we've been reading in Genesis 1 to 11, about the creation narratives, about the Nephilim story and the flood. And those are the things that we have been talking about for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, right? Something else that's really interesting that is going to happen as we transition from Genesis 1 to 11 is we're moving from this epic prologue. Lord of the Rings is a really great, I feel like, example here, because when you're watching the prologue of that movie, if you've seen it, it's about big epic battles, sweeping, scenes, and then fade to black, and then fade into Frodo Baggins in the Shire, right? And it gets way intimate, and it gets way personal, and it gets, now we're focusing on like these characters, and that often really is the experience that people have when reading Genesis, is we have all these big moments, and now we're zooming way in, literally, to just a family, right? Just a man and a woman and the family that they're wanting to generate. Okay? Does that make sense? So it really is Tolkien got it from the Bible. That's all I'll say. This is a standard thing. And so as we transition from Genesis 11 to Genesis 12 today, things are going to change sort of in how we're reading the story, especially because now that we've exited prehistory and we've entered history, you could say we have lots of archaeology that we can look at and things like that from the time of Abraham. In fact, those who go to Israel, Bob, when you go, you'll probably see this. There is a city gate in northern Israel that dates to the time of Abraham, and there's a story about Abraham going to this place, and so you can literally go to a city that Abraham was at. So yeah. Anyway, that's what I mean by I can't say that about anything having to do with like Noah and the flood per se, besides like that map and besides all the stories, you know what I mean? That map that shows where Noah's Ark is and stuff like that, the Babylonian map. Interestingly enough, it says that Noah planted a vineyard on the mountains of Ararat. The oldest winery in the world is actually at the mountains of Ararat. So kind of interesting. But that's another example where once you have post-flood, now you have elements of history that we can identify. That's kind of the nature of the flood. Human civilization was wiped out. You know what I mean? So we talked all about that. No outstanding questions. Just want to say congratulations, making it to the end of Genesis 1 to 11. Something that's interesting about all of these stories, and hopefully you have noticed this, is these stories are probably some of the most complex stories that you'll ever read. But in our culture, in secular culture, they are considered some of the most childish stories you could read, right? So it's kind of the exact opposite of how I mean, we've spent like like 10 hours just talking about 11 chapters of the Bible so far in this class. And we have barely scratched the surface of these stories in even each 2-hour meeting. So the same thing is true for the Tower of Babel story. So I want you guys to suspend, same thing with the flood, suspend sort of your like children's book board, children's board book versions of these stories, because there's a lot going on here, and it sounds simple, but there's a lot going on here. I get sort of irritated at internet presentations, and they're jokey, I know, but when it's like people are like hammering away, and then it's like suddenly someone speaking Chinese, and then someone speaking because of the languages. Yeah, yeah, well, yeah, so they're like, "Oh, they're working on the tower," and then they got confused the language, and it's like suddenly these languages start popping up everywhere, and it's like, "Okay, we're not building the tower anymore," you know? And it's like, it's an oversimplification of what is going on in the story, if that makes sense. And so who did the reading? Has anyone read this story before? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Sorry? You've heard of it. Yeah, you've heard of it. It's gonna be interesting, also that we have another genealogy to go through. So Genesis 10 is a whole genealogy. So lots of names we're about to read. And then Genesis 11 there's like 5 verses on the story of the Tower of Babel. Again, very simple story. And then there's another genealogy. So today is going to be fun. Lots of genealogy names and things like that. And so with that, I think that we can just get into it. I don't think we need to prolong it anymore. Let me just go ahead and jump ahead. Oops. And see if I have anything here first. Um, yeah, let me just sort of preface. So this is where we are in the biblical narrative. This is like the second or third time you've seen this slide, but you'll continue to see it as we continue to go through it. We're still very early, but you can see that we're at that transition period, right? I haven't taken too much time to break down this, but now that we're sort of transitioning into a second part, I will break it down now. So really, Genesis 1 to 11, it's garden to Babel. That's how that narrative is formed. Garden starts in a garden, ends at Babel, right? Or Babylon. Out of this Tower of Babel story, that's when you enter into the ancestral tales, right? So literally think of the rest of Genesis as here are the family ancestor narratives, right, of the people of Israel. This is what our forefathers did and how they lived and how their lives went, right? Then we get into the era of the emergence of Israel, or the birth of Israel proper, the nation of Israel. That's going to be starting at the book of Exodus. That's going to be when the Bible, you could say, starts to be penned by Moses. Okay. And the Bible at that time is just the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. And that becomes the like staple of everything else, because everything else that comes later is always looking back to what happened in the Exodus and seeing our current history, us being Israel, seeing their current history through the lens of what happened in their past, right? That what happened in their past is the main thing that informs their present. So then after the Exodus, Joshua, Judges, First and Second Samuel, that's when you enter into the period of the kingdom of Israel. All right. So in the time of the emergence from Egypt, of slaves from Egypt, they are nomads. They're 12 tribes. But then you get into the story of the kings, Israel's kings, and the kingdom of Israel. Right. So that transitions into the monarchy period. Right. And the monarchy period spans like 700 years, about. Well, no, more like 500 years. Okay. Yeah, like 500 years of like monarchical Israel. And then that's part of the story ends with them being exiled. Where are they exiled to? Babylon. Okay. So we're going back. Do you see this what happens in the garden? There's an exile, which ends in Babel, garden to Babylon. Then you have promised land to Babylon. Okay? You see what I'm saying? They're the same narrative parallel. And then when they're in exile is when they get some of the most, it's in the lead up to the exile and in the exile that they get some of the most definitive prophecies from their seers, from their prophets about one who is coming, who will liberate both Israel and all of humanity from their exile, right? From their exile, not just from the land, but their exile from God, you could say. Okay, does that make sense? The Old Testament ends as the people of Israel start sort of trickling their way back into the Promised Land. But even as they do that, there's a sense in which they say we are slaves in our own land, right? So the exile hasn't truly ended. They're still held under bondage. They're still waiting for Messiah. Then you have, in history, you have a period of what's called the silent years. You have what's called the silent years, the 400 years where there's no prophet that arises in Israel. And then you have the New Testament, okay? That's when Messiah comes, okay? So, and then that's going to be this part. And then there's also a part of the story that is not yet, and that's going to be the stuff that takes place that is looked forward to in the New Testament, okay? All the way into Revelation. Does that make sense? So that's the breakdown, and you can see we're still right at the very beginning, okay? 10 weeks in, and we're still right here. We're going to speed up, though. We're going to speed up. We'll spend 6 weeks in this section, okay? So we spent 10 weeks here, spend 6 weeks in this section, and then we'll kind of speed up. We're going to have to, because we have to get through the rest of Genesis in 6 weeks, and there's 50 chapters in Genesis. So does that make sense? There will be some small stories here and there that we'll just have to skip because we're trying to, go down a very specific path, but you can always read them on your own time. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. Remember that we are in the continuous fall story, okay, from Genesis 3 to 11, right? That there are a number of different events that take place in these chapters. So the first one is, it's on the screen. Okay, the garden, exile from the garden, the taking of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What's the second event? Well, the second major event, you could say. Yeah. Yeah. So that you could say that Cain kills Abel is leading to that second major event. And that's going to be, the Genesis 6 event, right? Which leads into the flood. The third major event of the fall is going to be in this story, the Tower of Babel story, okay? And that's super important because we are essentially going back to the beginning and starting over from scratch, starting from when Cain killed Abel, because now another city is being built, okay? And what Genesis 10 and 11 are doing is they're trying to model for you and present to you what God says in Genesis chapter 8, which is that the heart of man is inherently sinful, right? That it's bent away from God. Go ahead.
I was reading Mike Heiser, and then I've been reading about the Nephilim, because I'm still trying to figure all that.
Okay.
And he said it never says that a third of the angels went to, we have the idea that the devil's cast out from heaven with a third of the angels. And he said that doesn't happen. That never happened. And it talks about that only in Revelations. Does that make sense? I'm not understanding what he's saying about that.
Yeah. So to answer your question, you have to think about the fact that, yes, that verse does not appear in the Bible until Revelation. And he's saying that a lot of people think about a sort of prehistory like war, but even like prior to creation. So like a war in heaven, right? Prior to even Adam and Eve. For some reason, people have that assumption. It's not in the Bible, is what he's saying. Okay. The idea of the third of the angels, it comes from Revelation, and it's a prophetic, symbolic vision where Satan is conceived of as a dragon who's trying to eat the woman who's pregnant and has 12 stars crowned on her head and things like that. And then it says the tail of the dragon swept down a third of the stars. Okay. So even there's the star equals angels language. Okay.
So that's what he's.
And he's just saying the context for that verse is talking about the birth of the Messiah. So he's saying that that's not happening prior. That's talking about the birth of the Messiah. Yeah. And you can take that for what you will. You can say, but we can still glean that it's, the dragon sweeps down a third of the stars of heaven. You can still say, well, that means that a third are on the side of Satan. I don't, like that's up to you to decide that. He's just saying it's not a pre-Genesis story that is like being implicated later on, if that makes sense. That's what he's getting at. Yeah. But getting back to Genesis 10, what it's doing is it's framing for you that the building of the city and the building of human society, of a violent human society, it's starting up again, right? Sort of the same sort of thing that was happening prior to Genesis 6 and the flood is starting. It's the same root, it's the same weed of sin that grows within the heart of humanity. And so, but God, of course, is not sending a flood again. It says deliberately that he's not going to. So now it's like we have to live with this situation from here on out. Things are going to be different. The approach is going to be different. Some commentators have said, the transition from Genesis, from how God and humanity are presented in Genesis 3 to 11, is that God is like managing humanity on a corporate level to where trying to manage all of their sin. And again, not that like he's incapable, but the sense in which it's almost like whack-a-mole, that humanity is just spiraling, right? I think about like a child throwing a tantrum. There's a spiral in the same way where God put some mark on Cain and then Lamech uses that mark. So the mark on Cain is to make it so that no one kills Cain. There's no more bloodshed. But then Lamech takes that and he literally twists it and says, well, because Cain had a mark on him that he would be avenged, I can kill anyone that I want. And I will be essentially like, I'm doing that to avenge myself against people insulting me, right? And so it's that sense in which you see God putting restrictions and God putting these barriers, right? He's trying to hold humanity on a leash as they spiral out of control, but they continue to spiral out of control. I say trying here. I'm not meaning that in a sense. I'm not talking very theologically descriptive. I'm saying how it's presented in the scripture, if that makes sense. The idea here is that God is keeping to his fidelity towards our free will, right? That he allows us to make wrong decisions, that he desires that we make right decisions. We continue to make wrong decisions. And so what I'm trying to get at here is the same sort of thing is happening now in the story of the Tower of Babel, and in the building of the city. But so the approach that God is taking is going to be different. Okay. Does anyone know what that approach is? No? Huh? Yeah. Yeah. How is it different than before?
Scattered.
Mm-hmm.
He confused their language.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I want to take you, sorry, hang on. Here we go. I want to take you to Romans chapter 1. And I want to show you just a little bit of a reflection prior to getting into the story itself. So in Romans chapter 1, it talks about sort of what's going on in Genesis chapter 11, I would say. Okay? So I'll just go ahead and read it. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of those who by their wickedness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made, so they are without excuse. I'm going to pause there. This gets into our third week when we were talking about the identity of God and who God is, God's nature. So if you haven't seen that, go ahead and go back to look at that. Remember, God is being, God is the one who is existence, I am that I am. And so the presentation throughout this is not the only time the Bible says this, that people should recognize the existence of God through the things that exist. Okay, that because things exist, it's a self-evident conclusion that they have a cause, that they have a reason for existing. The reason for their existence is God. Okay, and we talked about what God means, right, in that meeting too. So, for they knew God, but they did not honor him honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. They exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling a mortal human being, or birds, or four-footed animals, or reptiles. Therefore, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity and to the degrading of their bodies among themselves. And I'll just stop there. I'll say they exchanged the truth of God about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the creator. And so what I'm trying to present to you, what I'm trying to present to you is right here. Therefore, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity. Therefore, God gave them up. Okay? That is what I want to sort of drive home to you guys, is what is going on in Genesis chapter 11. And that is the different approach that is taking place. Reflections on what that means. Any questions about that? Therefore, God, you might have heard it before, but I just want you to sit with it for a second. Therefore, God gave them up.
So they put idols over God, worshiping different idols, gods, statues.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Lord just, he allowed them to do that.
Mm-hmm.
In the same time, he also took his, he also made them where they would live, well, basically it was just sin, what they was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Destroy them on the end.
Let's talk about idolatry just for a sec. We've talked about it already. What is idolatry?
Is it idols when you idol something?
Worshipping something of a lower nature.
Okay, worshiping something of a lower nature. Yeah, that's a perfect way of describing it. So idolatry is at any point in which you take something that is created and you put it within your own heart, within the place where God belongs. Okay?
It's trying to find your life in something.
Yeah, right. Something lower. Yeah. And so we talked a bit about this in the week 3, if you haven't watched it, about the identity of God, the identity of idols, things like that. The idea is, and we gave that river example. Do you guys remember? You remember the river example? Your entire civilization depends on the river, right? Without the river, your civilization dies. You guys remember this? So what do you do to keep your civilization alive? You make sacrifices to the river. You try to appease the river. You try to bribe the river, and to keep it.
The importance of we need this to sustain us.
It's so funny. I saw a meme. There's a movie where some person, it's a superhero movie. It's a kid superhero movie, and I saw this last night on my phone, where this person throws this girl who has lava powers into a volcano because that gives her powers anyway. But the caption, it was a video of that happening, and the caption was like, Mayans, every time it didn't rain for 3 months, they throw someone into a volcano. I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah, it's bad. Obviously is a meme that was completely out of context. But the idea here is that you need something in life, right? You need rain, you need fertility, you need to ward off diseases, things like that. How do you accomplish those things? You bargain with the elements. Essentially, you bargain with the world, with the different disparate elements of the world, and that will give you what you need, right? Well,
people in the woo-woo community that actually place this God with universe.
Yeah, right, which is a created thing. So they that's a great example. Yeah. Sorry.
So this kind of makes me think of these other scriptures, like, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, basically I will not depart from you.
Mhm.
Come close to me,
Mhm.
I can come near.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. The essentially what's going on is that is what's being presented in Romans, right? They worshipped and served the created rather than the creator. So God gave them up.
I think.
What does that mean?
You gave the kids having a temper tantrum analogy.
Okay.
I think God just stepping his way back, letting them have their temper tantrum until they get exhausted, and then it's like, okay, now like let's turn to mom and dad, like let's turn back to God. Like we're exhausted. It hasn't gone our way.
That's a really good example. Yeah, that's a really good elaboration on that.
Their temper tantrum.
Yeah.
I feel too he just gave, when they say gave up, I believe that he just let them, that was their will.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe God gave them their will
Mm-hmm.
of
Right.
what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Not because he knew they was not acknowledging God as the creator. They had now chosen an idol to worship. So God gave their will up to that idol, what they wanted.
Yeah.
Is it
Great point.
Kind of back what Daniel was saying, the modern vernacular with Dr. Phil. How's that working out for you?
Okay.
Like the kids, I think about like in the kids in the kitchen, like when the mom's like, "Don't touch it, that's hot." I just took the pan out of the oven. Don't touch it, it's hot. But mom, I want to touch it. Don't touch it, it's hot. Fine, touch it. See what happens. How's that working out for you? Like,
Gotcha.
Kind of like he's like, "Don't do that. Like I told you not to do this. Like I'm giving you everything you need. Don't do that. I've given you. Fine. You want it? Have it your way."
Yeah.
Have
Yeah.
temper tantrums.
That's a good example.
I believe too that God give us choices, and we sometimes like we choose to rebel, and rebelling is really just a form of sin, going against what God tell you, the righteous of God, and then sometimes we as humans say, "No, I think I'm gonna do it my way. I'm gonna do it this way," but then there's consequences behind that sin, because sin is really death.
Yeah.
And so that's what I see is like we have a tendency to rebel against the righteous of God, but then we have to pay the consequences for those sins, for those choices.
Yeah. Great point. Yeah, and great thoughts all around. The main idea here is that in this story, you have the giving up of humanity, to allow them to worship these lesser deities in a way that God says, fine. Okay?
Question. Again, what does it say? Like, how does it describe it in the Hebrew text? Like, this is the English version, God giving up, in a sense. But how do they describe it in the Hebrew text?
It would be Greek. Oh, that is a good question. So we can go ahead and look at that. Romans chapter 1. You guys can see this? Okay. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. What is the truth? That God is God, right? I am who that I am. Yeah. Remember, God is not a being like other beings, right? He is never originating origin of being, right? Yeah, wholly other. Yeah. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them, for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that they have been made. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, birds, animals, and creeping things. Therefore, God, Theos, paradidomi, delivers. He delivers. Hand over, betray, deliver to prison. Okay? So think about a jailer, maybe, as an example, or a judge who sends someone to their sentencing, right? Or that has sentenced someone. Okay? Gave them up. Okay, gave them up. So the idea here, whoops, hang on. Gave them up. So hands over. So, and you could probably do more of that. Committed them over. Okay.
So it's literally the same.
It's a pretty literal word-to-word translation. Gave them up to the desires, the longings of their hearts, toward impurity, the dishonoring of their bodies. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the creator. Okay.
So instead of God saying my will be done, he's saying your will.
Yeah, essentially, that's what they do every time. Okay. That's what Adam and Eve do. That's what Cain and Abel do, or that's what Cain does. That is what the humanity does in Genesis chapter 6 with the Nephilim story. Every time it is them grasping at something that is lower than God, right? Grasping and taking hold of something that is lower than God. That's what we do. Yeah, that's what the nature of sin is. That's the missing of the mark, right? Reaching for something false. So are we understanding this? Okay. We haven't gotten into the reading yet, but the big thing is understanding that God handed them over, because that is what is going to happen in this story. Okay. And that is, it's going to present to you why the rest of the Bible works out the way that it does. God says, I'm going to work on every heart at a time, every individual. I'm going to start small. As Jesus says, the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed that is planted in the ground. That is what is the story that's about to happen. Okay. The mustard seed that is planted in the ground, and then by the end of the story turns into a grand tree. Okay. That's what is happening, because as God scatters the nations, he takes a mustard seed and he plants it in the ground. That is Abraham and Sarah, okay? And the people of Israel. So
I think it goes back to the garden too with the serpent. And it says that you can be like God.
right. Yeah.
Because I think how do you be tempted when you have everything?
Mm-hmm.
What they don't have is they can be like God.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they choose that, then they become their own God at that point.
It's good.
Could we also bring in the powers of darkness and principalities?
That's exactly what I'm getting at. No, that's when it says God gave them over, that is it. That is what I'm talking about. So remember that all human evil has spiritual evil behind it. And so the God gave them over, it means he allows them to be, you could say, yoked, using the yoke imagery of like of a bull, yoked, of a bull with the bar across its shoulders. That is the burden, right? A bull of burden, right? That he allows them to be controlled and yoked by other entities, right? Lower entities. Okay. So we're going to continue and read the chapters. But the point here is just to say, as you read it, it's not going to jump out at you, but as I explain it, as we talk through it, you'll understand that this is the point at which in the story of the Bible, it says God handed them over. Okay. He will reclaim them. In fact, that is the rest of the story of the Bible, is the reclamation of humanity. Humanity as generally as a corporate body, but it happens one individual at a time. Okay? Make sense? Okay. So Genesis chapter 10, we're going to go ahead and get started with the reading. If you remember, Noah has 3 sons. They exit the ark, and something bad happens in a tent. We sort of like scratched the surface of that last time. Main takeaway is that Ham is trying to subvert his father's patriarchal right in the family, and so Canaan is cursed, and lots of different branches that go into later parts of the Bible, but we just can't get into it. So I'll just start in Genesis 10. Okay. These are the descendants of Noah's sons: Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The children were born to them after the flood. Before we get into the next verse, I want you to just think about this. Japheth is north. Ham is south. Shem is center or central. Okay? Think about a world map. Japheth is north. Ham is south. Shem is center. Okay? So just as we get through it, I'm just going to read the names. Bear with me. Okay? The descendants of Japheth: Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The descendants of Gomer: Ashkenaz, Rippath, Togarmah. The descendants of Javan: Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Rodanim. From these the coastland peoples spread. These are the descendants of Japheth in their lands, with their language, by their families, in their nations. The descendants of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. The descendants of Cush, Sheba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteka. The descendants of Rama, Sheba and Dan, Seba and then Sheba, Sheba and Dedan. Cush became the father of Nimrod. He was the first on the earth to become a mighty warrior. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, and Akkad, and all of them in the land of Shinar. All of them in the land of Shinar. So take notes of these things, okay? The Nimrod, Babel, Shinar, okay? From that land he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, Kala, and Rezin between Nineveh and Kala, that is the great city. Egypt became the father of Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, Naphtuhim, Pathrusim. Oh my gosh, this is challenging. Casluhim and Caphtrohim, from which the Philistines come. Okay. Canaan became the father of Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Sinites, and the Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites. Afterwards, the families of the Canaanites spread abroad, and the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon to the direction of Gerar as far as Gaza, in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zoim, as far as Lasha. These are the descendants of Ham, by their families, by their languages, their lands, and their nations. To Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the elder brother of Japheth, children were born. The descendants of Shem, Elam, Asher, Arpachshed, Lud, and Aram. The descendants of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, Mash. Arpachshad, I don't know if that's how you say that, but I'm just saying it, became the father of Shelah, and Shelah became the father of Eber. To Eber were born 2 sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. And his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan became the father of Almodad. I know, deep sigh. Shelef, Haraz Maveth, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Abimiel, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, Jobab. All these were the descendants of Joktan. The territory in which they lived extended from Mesha in the direction of Sephar in the hill country of the east. These are the descendants of Shem, by their families and their languages, their lands, and their nations. These are the families of Noah's sons, according to their genealogies, in their nations, and from these nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. Okay.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. This is the chapter that you all skip, right? It's important not to skip it, though. You might have noticed some things. Before we get into chapter 11, just tell me what you might have noticed.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Well, I was thinking, so the writer was, the locations probably weren't named that until later. I know this is prehistory.
Mm-hmm.
But the writer's giving us these locations for the current reader at that time.
That's a good point. Yeah, so that's number one. The writer assumes the reader knows what the writer is talking about. None of us know what the writer is talking about. We can know, but inherently we don't know. Let me make an equivalent based off of what you might know. Let's say I'm writing a genealogy, and I say, and there he settled in and formed Visalia, right? And the son of this person was Los Angeles, and the son of this person was Sonoma County. Right. Okay? What's going on in your brain? Oh, I'm seeing a map of the world. I'm seeing a map of California, right? That's what's happening, okay? For the reader and the writer is intending that you are identifying in your brain an imaginative map of the world, okay? So that's number one. So good point. There's an assumption, and it's bringing up things that we understand later. Cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, as an example. The land of Tyre and Sidon, that is a big deal later on in the Bible, okay? Egypt, of course, is a major location in the Bible, okay?
Magog.
Magog, yeah. That's all the way into Revelation. Yeah. Whoa. Right? So, something else?
This is a joke in poor taste, but the names that stood out to me was Kush and Resin.
Okay. Yeah. That's so funny. Kush and Resin. That's so funny. So Kush, there's also interestingly that Kush tends to be the far reaches of the known world. Okay.
Peleg.
Peleg. What about Peleg?
It said Peleg, and then it went into like a little narration on like.
To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided.
Yeah. That's why I'm like, okay, why Peleg?
His name means divided. And something happens in Peleg's days. And what is it?
Well, earth was divided.
What does that mean in the Bible?
Yeah, that's I'm not putting it together.
Okay.
Putting, like, foreseen Babylon?
Mm-hmm. Here's something else that you guys might have noticed. What happens in the story of the Tower of Babel?
Well,
Different nations are created. Have we gotten there yet? The diaspora, yeah, that's a good way of talking about it. Yeah. Have we gotten there yet?
Like, explaining these areas so that you're visualizing these are the areas that are gonna.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're reading non-chronologically here, right? It's giving you all the nations that are going to come out of the story that we're about to read.
Oh, they're pulling the Star Wars.
Yeah. Explain. Like, what do you mean?
Well,
The last one before the first one?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there we go.
right in the middle.
Okay. Yes, and let's go to the prequel now. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. They're pulling a Star Wars.
So what you're saying is like this genealogy is actually like a map.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's called by scholars the Table of Nations. Okay. And it is a map. It's a textual map. Okay. It's a map of the nations that are going to arise out of the next chapter. There's your map. Yeah. I'll throw that up on the screen when we're in the slides. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's not continue with this. I've heard your thoughts, and then we're gonna get into the next chapter, and then I'll put on the slides, okay?
You want to take the unearthers?
Okay, go ahead.
The unearthers take that verse about the earth was divided as the tectonic plates moved into the continents.
Oh, really? Do they? Wow. I'm not a young earther myself, but yeah.
Because it
That's an
doesn't say
interesting.
mankind was divided. It says the earth was
Gotcha.
divided.
Okay. Hyper literal readings, yeah. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, just a thought.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't say I'm not a young earther just for the sake of it. I just meant that's not how I read it. Yeah.
Just say it.
The one important thing before I get into also yeah, Canaan is super important, right? Super important in the story. But notice how it says to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber. Okay, so what's important about Eber? Because it's bringing up Eber before Eber. It has a few generations to get to Eber, but it is bringing up Eber. What's important about Eber?
The eagles build I don't want to say a tower too.
No. Eber. There's some letters missing in this word that you would recognize it as. Hebrew. Yeah. Huh? Yeah. Can I buy a vowel? Hebrew. So the Eber is the root of Hebrew, okay? So all the children of Eber, okay? Mentioning the Eber prior to even Eber comes in the genealogy, because Eber's an important figure, right? Being a forefather of Abraham, the Hebrews. Okay, does that make sense? So let's move on to Genesis 11. So now we're going to the prequel. You guys ready? So now, narratively speaking, we have picked up where post-flood now, okay? So you just have to think about that now. Now we just read that textual map. Also, something that has to do with this timeline, Babel was mentioned in the chapter we just read, right? It was mentioned in what way? Nimrod. Mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, right? Erech, Akkad, and all of them in the land of Shinar. Okay? So, Nimrod. Okay, so now we're picking up narratively speaking. Okay, we had a detour, now we're going to the narrative. Genesis 11. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. As they migrated from the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they came and said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." Yahweh came down to see the city and the tower which mortals had built. And the Lord said, "Look, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing they will propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Okay, we're going to continue though, because there's another genealogy. So very short story and then another genealogy. All right, these are the descendants of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after the birth of Arpachshad 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arpachshad, I think I'm pronouncing that somewhat right, had lived 35 years, he became the father of Shelah. Arpachshad lived after the birth of Shelah 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah lived 30 years, he became the father of Eber, and Shelah lived after the birth of Eber 403 years, and he had other sons and daughters. When Eber had lived 34 years, he became the father of Peleg, and Eber lived after the birth of Peleg 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg lived 30 years, he became the father of Reu, and Peleg lived after the birth of Reu 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Reu had lived 32 years, he became the father of Serug, and Reu lived after the birth of Serug 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug had lived 30 years, he became the father of Nahor. Serug lived after the birth of Nahor 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor lived 29 years, he became the father of Terah, and Nahor lived after the birth of Terah 109 years and had other sons and daughters. When Tahor had lived 70 years, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Okay, almost done. Now these are the descendants of Terah. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran was the father of Lot. Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his birth, Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. Sorry. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Isaac. Now Sarai was barren; she had no child. Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot of Haran and his daughters-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans to the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Whew! We did it. Running out of breath there. Okay, so we have scaled ourselves right up to the time of Abram, who is Abraham, right? Okay, so we just went from Noah and the flood to Abraham, okay? Another big jump, lots of lives, right? Repeat myself a little bit back from that earlier genealogy. Some of these numbers can be symbolic. They can be, take them for what you will, literal, symbolic, or both. It's a repetitive genealogy from Genesis 10, right? Because we went over a lot of those names already, Genesis 10, but now it's extending it to Abraham himself, okay? All right. Any thoughts on the Tower of Babel story?
So is that where we got all the different trying to say nationalities, like because they scattered and then
So in the Tower of Babel, you have the scattering of the nations from Babel, right? So the idea is you have one people in the land of Shinar that is like building a unified humanity, right? And then God says this is not a good thing, and we'll go over why. And then he says we will scatter. So even the languages aspect, the language is less so about just you're speaking this language and I'm speaking this. The language is tied to the culture and the people, right? So the idea is that if you're speaking in the Egyptian tongue, it's different than those speaking in this tongue. You see what I'm saying? That there's different languages, and now these people, they are not the same people anymore. They can't work together in the same way that they were at Babel. It's not simply about, oh, now this person's using these words and these, that's a simple version of you saying that these people, they become completely different cultures, right?
Yeah, I mean, so a few things. I'm kind of thinking that like people, I think often assume like different languages, but me and my wife sometimes speak different languages.
Okay.
She says like she's okay, but really okay doesn't mean okay, and so there's like different context.
That's great.
Maybe they were just arguing,
Fine.
Right. Yeah.
That's funny.
But something that kind of was pointed out to me first, I'll say that like, God said, let us come down.
Uh-huh.
So it's like, okay, who's us?
Who's us? And is that us different than Genesis chapter 1? Because there was the let us make man in our image. That's a good question.
Yeah. And then the other thing that kind of popped out at me is that the people kind of manifested exactly what they were afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
Where they said, like,
They did.
Come, let us build this, for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth.
Mm-hmm.
So very similar, like, a woman, if she's afraid of like the man cheating on her, and she's like constantly like, are you cheating? And eventually he goes and cheats because he's tired of, or vice versa. I mean, to single out women.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Oftentimes
there's a
exactly what we're most afraid of.
because there's a hostility in relationship. Right. Yeah. Gotcha.
I wanted to go over verse 6. The Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language they began to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Right? So they were able, working as one nation, they will be able to achieve the possible. Essentially is what.
That's that's interesting. It's sort of a similar statement that he makes in the garden. He says we should exile from the garden them because lest they take from the tree of life and live forever, right? That's somehow a problem for God, in his mind, that humanity would continue, and not experience the consequence of their sin, right? Which is the death. So there's something going on there. Yeah.
Babel was in the middle of the desert, wasn't it? I mean, so it took forever for them to make those bricks and fire them to make bricks and fire.
Yeah. So there's two rivers in the plain of Shinar, and that would be the river Euphrates and the river Tigris. Okay. So and then Babylon is right smack dab in the middle of those two. Yeah, next to the Euphrates. But yes, in a plain in the desert. Yeah.
So I'm trying to picture how high the tower. So would it be like the tower, the Empire State Building, or?
Yeah, great question. There's a video that I sent. Do you get the videos?
I gotta get into that.
Okay. Okay. I'll make sure you get it.
Oh, back to what you were saying. That was the first thing that jumped out at me too. Is they were going to be scattered. You got to do this so that we don't be scattered. And I'm just like, but that was part of God's whole plan, is to go fill the whole earth.
Yeah.
And subdue it. And it's like, even now, they still know, hey guys, guys, we need to stick together because we do all this and we don't want to do what God is,
Mhm.
that we know.
The command is to fill the whole earth. Yep.
So God's like, fuck.
Yeah.
There's a reason why I need you.
Yeah.
So we're just going to make this happen because we
Yeah.
guys all together not doing this is going to cause more problems.
It's going to cause problems. Yep. Yep.
Points back to, like, we talked about rebellion in
Mhm.
the beginning.
Mhm.
So this is their rebellion.
Mhm.
They knew what God told them to do.
Mhm.
They were deciding as a group to not do
Right.
it. And he's like, okay, I'm going to give you over. I told you this is what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
You guys know you're not supposed to do it, so
Yeah.
we see it playing out.
There's a repetition.
Here's the consequences for
Your actions.
doing it.
Yeah.
I got to divide you because ultimately, this is the plan. I
Yeah.
need you guys to spread out.
Yeah. And what happens in Genesis 6:3-6 is the city. It's the same sort of thing that's happening. The centralization of humanity. The centralization of humanity is a centralization of humanity's evil. Okay? So we have to think about that for a second.
It's still supposed to be like nomads.
Don't give him any ideas, please.
Okay.
Let's go off the grid.
Off the grid.
Stop encouraging it.
That's why I keep wanting to.
Well, we go back to the Cain and Abel meeting on the idea of cities versus nomads, city dwellers versus shepherds, and things like that. So that was an important meeting that we had, if you remember that. But yep.
That obviously here, but we're not really talking about is genealogies.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they important?
Mhm.
Why are they important? And just they're alluding to that God deals with generations,
Mhm.
and He deals with families over generations.
Mhm.
That
I mean,
makes
those
me
are
think
these
of
foundational
Yeah.
kinds of things that, because I look at myself and we've had genealogies done in our own family, and it goes back, but maybe a few hundred years,
Yeah.
not really beyond that. And then you might know their name and when they lived, but you don't know anything about them
Mhm.
necessarily. Whereas this is, we're kind of losing, I think, something that's maybe important to God because
An aspect of genealogy and
made it-
where we come from.
made this really important. And then again, it starts over in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Where it's at.
Yeah. Really good insights. Let's go ahead and get into the slides. And I would say, Mike, about the size, there's a really good video on the archaeology of the Tower of Babel. So I'll make sure you get that. Okay, you guys ready? So this is stuff that I've already covered, but in continuing from the flood narrative, the biblical story transitions from the age of prehistory into the world of the present. This is the current world in which we now live. With the most ancient human civilization lost to the floodwaters, we can now enter into when history begins proper with the founding of ancient Babylon. Okay, so the history, this is attested to just in general archaeological history and in the Bible, is that the earliest human civilizations, the ruins of which we have, go back to Babylon, this land in Mesopotamia, where that's our modern term for the land of Shinar, is Mesopotamia, where we have the most ancient cities of Ur, right? Ancient Babylon, ancient Akkad, which are mentioned here, right? Things like that, those cities, and this is the current world. Okay, this is the world in which we live. And I've already gone over the non-linearness of this passage, so I'm not going to cover this slide. But yes, we were talking about the Table of Nations. So in the 10th chapter of Genesis, this is among many of its kind in the Bible. There will be other genealogies like this that are trying to give you a map like this, but this is a really important one. It's a textual literary map is what it is, okay? So like genealogies, these sections of the Bible serve to present a specific set of data. In this case, the nations and tribes of the world and their origins, to communicate unique and important theological messaging. In the case of the Table of Nations, the world is accounted for in 70 nations. Okay, so we didn't count it, but it's 70 nations that together make up the totality of humanity. These nations are collectively the expanse of the expansive human family that, in the biblical understanding, are ultimately destined to be reconciled to the Creator through the chosen one, through the promised chosen one, right? So. And we'll get more into that later on, what I mean by that. But let's just go ahead and look at these. Remember, I said Japheth is north, Ham is south, and Shem is like in the middle here. Okay, and so Japheth is going to be all of these southern European nations. Okay, and like central, like West Asian nations. Okay, like Turkey, and this is where modern day Iran is right over here. This is Israel, the land of Israel today. This is the land of Shinar. Okay. Does anyone know what this is? Huh? What? Italy. Yep. That's right. So, so Japheth, Northern European, or excuse me, Southern European, and then Ham would be like African, and a bit of like Arabian, and of course the Canaanites proper, and then Shem is going to be all of the Mesopotamian sort of middle central region. Okay, that's sort of how it breaks down. Thoughts on this?
Ham's genealogy was it like Sodom and Gomorrah was in Ham's genealogy?
All of the notice how all of these are mentioned, right? All of these are mentioned in greater detail because you can imagine all of these clans, there's that many clans in all these places, but these are mentioned in particular because this is where much of the next books of the Bibles are going to take place. So the resolution is much higher for these. Sorry, you were saying though?
Oh, in Ham's genealogy, Sodom and Gomorrah were in his genealogy, and Ham is the one that, made the sin with his dad.
So, and then there's a curse that comes upon. But what is the curse? What is the curse? Who does it come on? Canaan. Really interesting. So Ham does something. Canaan, his son, gets a curse, right? Now, these are the tribes that many of which, in the book of Joshua in particular, there's going to be a command of God to go essentially destroy them. Not in their bloodline per se, but in their culture. And why is that? The founding narrative of all these nations is that their forefather did something awful to his father, and it sort of marks these people as and Canaan. If we take the theory that I was getting at, that the thing that happens in the tent is actually so many things to get into here. I'll just briefly touch on it. That let's assume, for the sake of argument, that what happens in the tent is that Ham actually rapes his mother. Okay, it's a Hebrew language type thing. I don't know if you guys have heard this before. I spoke on it briefly last time. Then the birth of that child is Canaan, is what the theory is. Okay, so the Canaan is born out of this awful circumstance, and the culture that is born from that is an evil. These are these evil cultures, right?
Did you get the theory from? Because I've never really got.
You want me to go over it real fast?
Yeah.
It says Ham saw the nakedness of his father. And if you go into like the book of Leviticus, for example, that saw the nakedness of his father is an idiom that's used throughout the book of Leviticus in chapters on how you're not supposed to have sex with your family members. And then in particular, it says those who see the nakedness of their mother, have sex with their mother, sees the nakedness of their father. The wife, the nakedness of a man is the nakedness of his wife because they're one flesh. So the theory is that it's an idiom for if he saw the nakedness of his father or uncovered his nakedness, that he means some people will take it. He either sexually exploited Noah himself, but then why does the curse come upon Canaan? The son, you know what I mean? The child of Ham. So that's where people they come to say, well, no, it's a incestual union that happens there forcibly by Ham. And then the child that's born from that is Canaan, a bastard child, right?
And that he actually had a child with his mother.
Yeah. That's essentially the theory. That's theory that
The rape part of it.
just because it says yeah, there's the drunkenness, and then there's a parallel story with Lot and his daughters. There's a lot that goes into it. It's a very cryptic story. The point is we're using context clues and Hebrew language to identify a theory because it's one of those stories that it's like you can have 10 different opinions on it, if that makes sense. So I'm just giving you can take it, you can say that's bunk or whatever. I'm just giving it.
This is a pretty big theory, though.
Well, I think it explains a lot personally. it's a theory that answers the most questions, so that are present in the narrative. I didn't have the opportunity to present it to you in its fullness, but yeah, those are the slides from last time, and maybe we could do a bonus at some point. But let's continue, okay? The point here is that Canaan. Okay, let's just full on. Regardless of whether or not that is what happens in the story. What happens in the story of the tent is that Ham and Canaan are identified. Ham and then his child Canaan are identified as like this cursed generation, okay, or this cursed genealogy, okay.
So, question: why only Canaan? What about Cush and Egypt and Put?
Yeah.
We're the children of his actual life.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's why it explains it. You brought it up because Canaan is because Noah says, "Cursed be this son." You see what I'm saying? So
There's
anyway.
something really
Canaan's like, I
bad
didn't do
happened.
anything.
It's what Canaan's going to do. The vision of these genealogies is that the sins of the father, you know what I mean, that they are visited upon the son, right? So the idea is like, you could call it generational generational trauma, generational sin, the patterns of my family line manifest within me. And so what breaks that is obviously that they turn away from sin. But yeah, lots of questions.
No, I just want to say this, but don't like even incest now it still exists now, doesn't it?
Okay,
First.
really, really good point. Only to say that that's another. Let's say we go with this theory. That also means that, again, implied in the text of the Bible is that the culture of Canaan is an ancestral culture generally. And what happens when you have incest? You have deformities, you have issues. You see what I'm saying? And so the cursedness of Canaan, you see what I'm saying, coming forth through.
And that's
So
what I was gonna say. I don't. Sometimes like we want to say immediately, "Oh God, put a curse on them." I think it's more of our omniscient, all-knowing God saying, "You guys don't realize what you just did with that, and what problems are gonna come."
I agree.
You're gonna be cursed now because I already see what's gonna be coming now.
Two things. Noah is the one who pronounces the curse, not God. No, that's okay. You are making a great point on Genesis 3 and generally curses in general. Yeah, but that's just an interesting point. You could say Noah is prophetically observing what is going to take place in the line of, yeah.
More the prophetic thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not magic.
Yeah,
It's not magic. I'm casting a spell. Yes, it's not magic.
In the beginning, at first it was okay, right? Because it was just Adam and Eve,
Mhm.
and then we got to the point with Noah,
Mhm.
and then it was a curse.
Oh, because you're assuming Adam and Eve are brother and sister or something, or their children?
Yeah.
I see. There's a lot to be said about that. Back in the Cain and Abel story. Well, back in the Cain and Abel story, we talked about the possibility of other humans, if you guys remember. So
We thought so, but then you said Eve was the mother of all men.
it depends on how mother of all the living, and it depends on how you take that verse. Because in Genesis chapter 1, there's humanity created generally, and then Cain says, "Whoever finds me kills me." Cain married his wife, and he built a city. So where did all those people come from? It's up to you guys to decide. Let's continue.
Yeah, I think you touched on it though. Like, we have to remember, like, the Bible is mainly, we're tracing this story because, like, the things that are important to us are coming through this line. So there's a lot of stuff that's left out because it's not as pertinent to what we need to get.
There's a lot of details on the margin.
Those places where it's like, you guys need to know about these people because this is where we're going to track the story from.
Yep.
Doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't other stuff.
Yeah. These are nations and generations, and there's lots of stories and lots of details, right? That we just are not. Lots of we can go in any which way. I don't want this to deviate us too much. I want to give an example of, since we're here and we're running out of time, so please do not let us stay here too long, and it's a sensitive issue. I want to acknowledge the fact that in the story of the curse of Canaan, you have an immense example of people misusing scripture. for whatever they want, whatever awful thing that they want. If anyone knows about the curse of Ham, yeah, that slave owners had used in history to justify their keeping of African slaves, um, because the lands of Africa are even though Canaan is cursed, so which is not even the African nations. Again, like we're literally, you just take an example from the Bible that is like you just didn't even look at it, if that makes sense. And then you just decide to imbue meaning in it. This is how our culture goes so wackadoo, right? Just wanted to acknowledge that we have an example. Sure. Yeah. Well, it's just an example where you have a moment like that where people just they just like don't even read the words, and then they just say, the Bible says this. And then no one else reads it. You know what I mean? And so they just are like, oh, okay, it says that,
The irony is they become cursed.
Yeah, that's, yeah. Okay, so good. Let's continue, guys. The nations. Is it not going? Are we good? Okay, the nations. So these are the 70 nations scattered from Babylon: Egypt, Cush, Canaan, Sheba, Akkad, Amorites, etc. I mentioned all of those because they're more important than some later on. Eber is the root for Hebrew, the forefather of Abram. The Gentile is just the Latin transliteration. The Hebrew word is goyim, of nations, right? So the nations plus the chosen ones, which will be Abraham and Israel, right? Eventually, all the nations are grafted into the body, which is the chosen ones, but right now they are separated. Okay, Gentiles, nations, and the people of Abraham. So these are the origins of the world's nations, their tribes, their languages. Abraham's family is selected from among the nations. God's, you could say, his enforced fruitful multiplying. So the command was be fruitful and multiply, spread across the whole earth. And now God has to enforce that reality, right? So Japheth is in the north, Shem is in the center, and Ham is in like the southwest. Okay. So in the verse, it says, Cush became the father of Nimrod. He was the first on the earth to become a mighty warrior. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Okay. So he was a mighty man, a mighty hunter. What does it say of the Nephilim?
They're mighty warriors.
Mighty warriors, right? So the term that is used here is Gibor. That's the Hebrew term. So the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of humans and had children by them, they were mighty men of old, the Giborim, right? Men of renown. And then he was a mighty Gibor before the Lord, therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. So I'm not saying he was a giant. I'm saying that you have a pattern that is emerging, especially because, remember, the idea is the Nephilim were the founders of great civilizations, right? And so Nimrod, he's carrying on this pattern. Remember, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, right? Yeah. And of course, the Nephilim show up time and again throughout the books of the Old Testament. And so the idea is with Nimrod, the founder of Babylon, remember, it's the same kind of thing that was taking place prior to the flood. Something is happening that is very similar. Okay? That Nimrod, which his name means rebel, okay? Or rebellion, or we will rebel, right? That's the name, or the meaning of the name of Nimrod. He's supposed to be this great figure of the ancient past. So some people will say, remember Gilgamesh? Anyone remember that statue? Some people say, Nimrod is Gilgamesh, right? Because Gilgamesh is said to be a founder of great cities, right? In this ancient post-flood world. Some people will take some other ancient figures to say, oh, this is who the Bible is talking about, right? But remember, Gilgamesh is conceived of as a giant. Nimrod, he's the founder of Babylon, right? And his name in the Hebrew, it means rebellion. So Babylon and rebellion. Babylon, or Babel in Hebrew, means confusion, right? So rebellion and confusion, this city that is founded as a sin city, okay? So he's the mighty founder of Babylon, Assyria, and more. He is considered the original builder of the Tower of Babel. You could say he's the offspring of the Nephilim in some respect. You could say spiritual or literal offspring of the Nephilim, or the continuation of that. He's a powerful warrior and king over world empires. So especially the world empires that are going to be the main central enemies of the people of Israel throughout the story of the Bible. Okay, so Nineveh shows up, right? And it says they found Nineveh and Assyria, the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire. These are the main central empires that are going to be at war with Israel, and that are going to be the ones that ultimately defeat Israel when they are sent into exile. Okay, so super important is that idea that we have the origin of these nations. Okay, let's get into the tower itself. Okay, can we get into the tower? That was Genesis 10. Lots of interesting stuff there. But now we're actually getting into the tower. Okay, how's everyone feeling? Feeling good? Okay, I know that was a lot. In the next 25 minutes, we will finish. I'm going to go ahead and read Genesis chapter 11, verse 1 again, just so we can refresh. I'm going to start there and just read the Tower of Babel story. So now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we will be scattered abroad the face of the whole earth." The Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which mortals had built. And the Lord said, "Look, they are one people, and they all have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not be able to understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad there from the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Okay, so God's command is, number one, the image of God is what?
The Trinity.
Interesting. You said that because the next slide came up?
Well, no, but that's all.
Okay.
The way I
Image of God reflects the Trinity, you could say. How so?
yeah, let us go down.
Let us make man in our image. And the image of God is what?
Love, kindness, like all the.
Okay. In the description of the verse itself. Male and female. Okay, so back in the passage we talked about image of God is a multiplicity or a plurality, right, of expressions of God, right? Relational. Yeah, there you go. Good. In the image of God, he made them male and female. He made them, it uses plural pronoun and singular pronoun for the image of God, right? The same way that you can sort of use plural pronoun for God in the Trinity, right? So the idea, you could say, is that God wants a diversity or a multiplicity or a plurality of expressions in his creatures, right? And that because God's nature is plurality, unified multiplicity, you could say. God is Father, Son, and Spirit. They are distinct but one. And same thing, humanity, male and female, distinct but united, one flesh. Okay, and so what we have in the story of the Tower of Babel is the opposite of that. Okay, a one language, one tongue empire, right? Centralization. That's the key word that I want you to recognize here. Centralization. Okay, unified to a purpose that is against who God is a false unification. Okay, it's a false sense of unification, right? So if God's nature is a complex unity, then the opposite of that nature, as reflected in humanity, would be a one language empire. So centralization of power, centralization of culture, centralization of control. Okay. While God desires the humans to image him throughout the wide world, the humans of Genesis 11 decide to centralize their authority and build a tower dedicated to the might of all-powerful human government. This moment in the biblical narrative becomes the foundation for all condemnation of empire throughout the Bible. While God's kingdom is said to be made up of all of the diverse nations and languages of the world, Babylon is one nation and one language. While God's kingdom comes down to bless earth, the builders of Babel try to reach divinity by themselves apart from their true creator. Okay, so you have to think about the unity that is identified here in the Tower of Babel, that they are able to, it says they had one language, the same words. Let us build a tower and let us represent this centralization of humanity in this tower. Let us represent ourselves as being a unified body that is trying to reach heaven collectively together. Okay, a collectivism aspect to that of we are negating the sense of plurality. God said, be fruitful and multiply. So multiply is multiplicity. Have many, right? Multiplicity, but let us centralize. Let us have unity, right? Unity without multiplicity is a demonic unity. Okay, does that make sense? I hope that you're understanding what I'm saying. But that is what is being presented here, and they want to build a tower with its top in the heavens. Just think about what a tower represents for a second. What is a tower?
Well, I'm thinking of like the giant aspect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like a what? A mountain. So both the giant and a tower is seen by everyone, you could say. Remember, I've given this example multiple times about the directionality. Everyone can see me and I can see all of you, right? And all of your attention is on me, right? The directionality of me being a head taller than you, there's something significant about that, okay? Because I'm on a stool. It makes me higher, right?
And
With a giant
reaching up to heaven.
reaching up, okay? But heaven itself, we have intuition to say that like higher is somehow more powerful and better, but I'm trying to identify why that is, okay? So there's the heightness, so giants, tower, both a tower is seen by everyone, you could say, and it represents power or a centralization of power. Someone else?
Yeah. Well, protection, you get the high ground.
High ground?
Authority.
Okay, yeah, authority. Yeah, good. Let's continue, and we'll continue talking about towers, because I want you to understand again the directionality of understanding the idea that commands come from above, right? So whenever we say word came down, what do we mean? Let's say I'm on a team, like I'm working. What do I say? Word came down. Yeah. Do I mean literally that the word came down? That words fell from the sky, right? No, I mean that there's a hierarchy of authority, right? And that it has descended to me. You know what I mean? And now I'm saying it to my peers, right? That's like a perfect example. I think I can demonstrate that there's a directionality to our language, just imbued within our language, right? That the idea of higher things are more powerful and lower things, even it's in our cognition. If I'm powerful, I'm standing tall, right? If I'm ashamed and weak, I'm hunched over, right, in my body. If you climb to a mountain, you can see everything, right? If you put your face down on the ground, you can see specks of dust and pebbles, right? So your capacity for coherence and understanding of the world, it diminishes the closer you get to the ground, you could say. Okay? So think about all of this as we're talking about a tower with its top in the heavens. Let us build a tower with its top in the heavens. What does that represent then? Yeah, that we want to achieve high authority, right? That we want to concentrate our power in a centralized thing, okay? How do they build a tower? With bricks. What are bricks? What are bricks as opposed to rocks?
They're like specifically.
So someone say it loud.
They made the bricks themselves.
They make them. So the difference between a brick and a rock is a brick is artificial. Okay? So this is when we get into technology. Conceptions on technology. Yes. So again, a continuation from what was going wrong prior to flood is now continuing down the line into this era as well. So the bricks used to build an artificial mountaintop, a tower, which gives humanity power to bring down the gods so they could exploit their power. Think about the bricks representing a technological advancement, a fundamental technological advancement that allows them to move in a certain direction towards achieving power for themselves, right? Achieving authority for themselves, okay? Making a name for themselves. So when you think about the Terminator, What is the name of the organization that brings down the world? Skynet. Skynet. Okay. And what do they do? What does Skynet do?
It was AI that advanced itself.
And they're robots, right? What is AI and robots? It's technology. Okay. So this is a imbued narrative that we all see. It's inherent. The idea that we use technology to advance ourselves, right? We use technology to ascend ourselves, and somehow that becomes a destruction for us, right? That becomes a problem for us. That it is in times where we are unified that we work to do that, right? And then out of that thing that happens comes a dissolution, right? Out of the technology, out of the things that we build in order to allow us to ascend to a higher reality, you could say, it causes dissolution for ourselves because we're reaching for that ourselves. We're building it ourselves. It's not coming down. We're building ourselves up. Are you guys following me here? This is the pattern of what happens with technology. You could say the Industrial Revolution is just another example of that. What comes out of the Industrial Revolution? Think about history. Child labor. Okay. Also, 2 world wars, the bloodiest century in all history, right? So greed, yeah. Okay, you bring up ChatGPT is really good. I want you to think about the Tower of Babel in reference to our modern day, because we're living a Tower of Babel story these days for sure. Okay, what is the tower itself, though? What is the tower itself? If you watch the video, you would know the tower is a ziggurat, okay? A ziggurat, or a step pyramid, right? So this is a conventional thing that we find in ancient history. Ancient cultures built massive staircases to reach the gods in heaven. One of them.
Text and everything else also.
Yep. It's really interesting. So one of the most notable and lasting constructions of the ancient world are the tower temples of the gods, called ziggurats. Civilizations around the world have each contributed to the construction of ziggurats, from ancient Mesopotamia to South America. For ancient cultures, ziggurat temples localized worship of the gods as a necessary part of any thriving civilization. Ziggurats economized idol worship and made it part of the structure of society. They were at the center of ancient culture as the place where the unseen meets the seen, where the official priests could go and satisfy the gods and receive blessing from above. As models of the cosmic mountain, the towers were conceived of as stairways to heaven. They were humanity's self-made attempts to harness the power of the divine. Okay?
Well, in the Bible, when we make sacrifices, we go up the mountain.
Yeah. You never have a Yahweh worshiper build a ziggurat. That's something that I will say. Why is that? We've talked about Eden as the cosmic mountain. You guys remember? A ziggurat is a mountain. It's a man-made mountain. Yeah. Really interesting, right? So think about it as the ziggurat, or the tower, is the representation of all of man's attempts to build for themselves a way back to the garden. Okay? It's particularly through technological advancement.
So an artificial path.
An artificial path. Yeah, it's really good. An artificial path, a man-made path, a path built through technology. Okay? And technology, I don't mean digital code, right? I mean literally like artificialness, that things that we use, that we sort of have to form and like work hard at to build something for ourselves, to make it, being self-made men. Okay? So something interesting is the Tower of Babel story. I've read, this is my last time that I'll do this for these chapters, especially, is there are parallel stories. Okay, so we did that for the creation. I showed you parallel stories for the genealogy of Genesis chapter 5. I showed you a parallel story for the Genesis 6 Nephilim story. I showed you a parallel story for the flood narrative. I'm going to show you the parallel story for the building of the Tower of Babel. Okay, from Babylon's own point of view. Okay, so this is their narrative, right? So remember how the chaos waters The gods are born within the chaos waters. They emerge from the chaos waters, including Marduk is one of those gods that is born and emerges from the chaos waters. And then he slays Tiamat, the chaos dragon. Okay, so this is at the end of that. Okay, so the Anuna gods of heaven and earth made ready to speak to Marduk, their lord. So this is after he has won the war with Tiamat, the chaos dragon. Okay, this is where they're going to command the construction of the tower, so that Marduk can dwell within the tower. Okay. Now, you, Lord, who have liberated us, what courtesy may we do to you? We will make a shrine whose name will be a famous saying, your chamber that shall be our stopping place. We shall find rest therein. When Marduk heard this, his features glowed brightly, like the day. Then make Babylon the task that you have requested. Let its brickwork be formed. Build high the shrine. The Anuna gods set to with hoes. 1 year they made its bricks. When the second year came, they raised up as Agila, the counterpart for the deep waters. They built high the ziggurat, seated the gods of his fathers for a banquet. This is Babylon, your place of dwelling. Take your pleasure there, seat yourselves in its delights. The great gods sat down, they set out cups, they sat down at the feast. All the orders and designs had been made permanent. All the gods had divided the stations of heaven and the netherworld. And the 50 great gods took their throne. The 7 gods of destinies were confirmed forever for rendering judgment. So the idea is the tower represents a man-made, built dwelling for a divine council, okay, to come and be seated with the chief god, Marduk, who slayed Tiamat at the chief throne, okay? Remember, I talked about what temples and idols are. They localize deities so they can be appealed to through rites. This was week 3. So looking at the passage of Babylon's own reckoning of the building of the tower for them represents the place in which they can commune with the gods, okay? What are the gods in their view? It's radically different than God in the Hebrew mindset. We talked about this in week 3. And this is the point, that the gods are born according to the Babylonians. You see what I'm saying? They are part of the natural world. It's their communing with the powers of the natural world in order to receive from the natural world its bountiful offerings, okay? So the god of the river, the god of the sky, the god of this, the god of that, right? That, what does the tower represent? The place in which all of them can come and be contacted. You see what I'm saying? That they can now bargain with all of them in the tower. It's a centralization of the powers in the tower, in the man-made dwelling of the gods. Okay? Tower of Power. There you go. So, thoughts on this? Reflections. Huh?
I think it was Hercules.
Mount Olympus?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mount Olympus is the Greek cosmic mountain version. But again, the difference between this goes back, and this is where week 3 was super important, about the difference between the Israelites and how they're conceiving of the Most High Yahweh, right? I am that I am, versus the dwelling of the powers of creation that you can harness them through these temples, right? That you're building.
The question is, why are they as close as the stories as close as they are?
What do you mean?
Well, they have different meanings.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the elements of the story are.
Isn't it incredible?
So my question is, why is that? Why do people who are not following him?
Yeah, they're telling the same sort of story. They're both talking about the building of the Tower of Babylon, right? About the building of a ziggurat. But the implications are very different. For the Babylonians, you have to think about what it represents to the human being on the ground. The ziggurat represents you throwing a lasso around the power and principality and bringing it down so that you can bargain with it. It's power that is acquired by humanity through the dwelling of the gods that live in the temple, right? Live in the tower.
So, and I go back to your Romans 1 example, which is who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what is may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them.
Yeah.
So God has put within us
Mhm.
the ability to know certain things,
Right.
and maybe even parts of the story that we don't.
Yeah.
What, I mean, when He gave
I
us
see what you're
over,
saying.
right?
Mhm.
We still contain something in our DNA.
Yep.
That knows the story.
Yeah.
That's just my.
That's interesting.
So.
I think the point that I want to make is God handed them over to these lesser deities, to the created things, right? That's what the Babylonian account is talking about, right?
How did they come up with that account? Where would they even come from?
Yeah, you could say it's a shared history.
Well, but it started someplace. And what I'm saying is,
Mhm.
whoever started that story
Mhm.
had it within them.
Yeah.
As God
Mhm.
made it known. I mean, there's still something in our
Yeah.
humanity, our DNA, that knows
Right.
the truth about God. But
Are you saying because there is an assumption that someone was like able to actually witness the tower being built, right? So, but you mean the meaning and sort of the spiritual, yeah.
And why even make a tower?
Yeah. Yeah, I got you.
So something is in us. I mean, we're like, one of the things I think we've probably heard is that we were created to worship.
Mhm. Yeah.
So we're gonna worship.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah.
That could be like the dragon
Mhm.
is the imitator.
Mhm.
That's another way.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because you worship the dragon,
Mhm.
or you worship God.
Yeah, the imitator. That's a good way of thinking about it.
Real story.
Yeah, so the point that I'm making with this, we have to fly through the next slides. I'm sorry, guys. I want you to get to church. So, and it starts in 15 minutes. So, got to fly through them if that's okay. The point that I'm trying to make is that with a passage like this, it's telling you about the idea of building a place for the gods to dwell. Is super important. And this is important in the Bible too. The difference is that God is the one who provides the place for the dwelling. Okay? Are you understanding what I'm saying here? The whole story of the Bible is, you know, King David comes to Jerusalem and he says, I'm going to build you a house. And he says, no, I'm going to build you a house. Okay? And it is your son who will build my house. Who is he talking about?
Solomon.
Not really. He's talking about Jesus. Okay? Who is God. Okay? So I just want you guys to think about that for a second, okay?
He did build. Yeah.
This is the point. God is the one who builds the house, his own dwelling. He is the one. The fact that they don't build a ziggurat, that they build it on Mount Zion, it's God's prerogative to do that. It's not, come, let us build a tower and make a name for ourselves and acquire this power and this authority. You see what I'm saying? And we'll bribe the gods into blessing us. It's God chooses to bring his blessing in the way that he wants it. Okay? Okay? Does that make sense? You're understanding the difference?
The opposite. Blessed are the poor in spirit.
Yeah. For they will inherit everything. Yeah.
It's not the ones that we're gonna get this. It's like, I got nothing here.
I got nothing.
Right.
Yeah. It's really good. So the man-made cosmic mountain, the ziggurat, they would actually put a bunch of plants all over it because it's supposed to represent the Garden of Eden. Okay? But again, it's man making the Garden of Eden. It's literally, and okay, so when AI first came out, everyone was talking about how it's going to make us immortal. I don't know if you read that in the news, but it's a Tower of Babel story, okay? AI is the tree of life. You know what I mean? Like, there we go. We have access to the tree of life because AI is going to be able to cure cancer, and cure disease and cure aging and like all these things. And so it is that story just replaying, okay?
First word is artificial.
Yeah, artificial. Yeah. And that's what the tower is. It's artificial mountain, artificial Garden of Eden. They would put the plants all over it, And the idea is the shrine at the top of it is where you have now entered into the holy place, right? Where the God is dwelling, okay? And remember, Israel is going to have this same thing, but it's a God-guided process. It's not a come let us do this, type of process, okay? So this is John Walton. The best indication of the function of the ziggurats comes from the names given to them. For instance, the name of the ziggurat at Babylon, Et-Menanke, means the temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. One at Larsa means the temple which links heaven and earth. Most significant is the name of the ziggurat at Sippar, temple of the stairway to pure heaven. This stairway was a visual representation of that which was believed to be used by the gods to travel from one realm to another. Here's something else. Remember, Jacob sees a vision of a stairway to heaven, right? Of the true stairway to heaven, that the angels of God ascend and descend. And then what does Jesus say in the New Testament? He says, on the Son of Man, you will see the angels of God ascending and descending. Okay? So this stairway was a visual representation of what was believed to be used by the gods to travel from one realm to another. It was solely for the convenience of the gods and was maintained in order to provide the deity with amenities that would refresh him along the way. At the top of the ziggurat was the gate of the gods, the entrance to their heavenly abode. At the bottom of was the temple, where hopefully the god would descend to receive gifts and worship from his people. A similar mentality concerning the location can be seen among the settlers of the American West, who picked up their towns and moved them into proximity with newly laid railroad tracks, then erected a train station so that the train would stop there and bring economic benefits. In summary, the Tower of Babel project is a temple complex featuring a ziggurat, which was designed to make it convenient for the god to come down to his temple, receive worship from the people, and bless them. Okay, so, but the point is that it's man-made, right? It's a man-made effort to bargain and receive blessings from the gods, okay? From these lower powers, from these entities. Highly recommend you go and listen to Meeting 3, where we talked about paganism and idols and temples and things like that. Notice how it is a human universal to build these things, okay? To build these representations of deity, and it's all in the vision of the Garden of Eden. It's all in the vision of the cosmic mountain, right? These step pyramids, or these pyramids generally. The pyramids themselves are burial chambers so that the pharaohs can go and achieve their deity, right? And so very interesting, very interesting. So the Tower of Babel, it's humanity's futile attempt at return to Eden, technological development and power, the anti-Eden, representing a great empire. Babylon goes all the way to the end of the Bible as representing that great human empire that needs to be thrown down ultimately for the new creation to give birth, right? The first and earliest iteration of Babylon is the birthplace of the nations of the world. It's where God scatters the nations of the world, where God assigned the gods of the nations. We'll get into that, and then we'll finish where God chose Abram. So let's talk about that, okay? Let's talk about that. And we'll be done. In the story of the Tower of Babel, humanity attempts to use technological advancement to harness divine power. Their efforts are thwarted when the Creator brings down confusion and dissolution upon their efforts, and they are scattered in a targeted disunification, resulting in the formation of the nations. So the nations have their gods, right? The nations have their gods. The gods of Egypt, the gods of the Canaanites, the gods of the Greeks, okay? Why do they have their gods? Is a question that you may have asked. What's the difference between their gods and the God of Israel? Why does Israel have a unique God? And why is that God the God of everyone, even though these other nations have their gods, right? The Bible actually answers that question, okay? It answers that question. So remember, God in the Hebrew is Elohim. What is Elohim? You guys remember? It means, yeah, God or gods, any spiritual being, okay? And so what happens in the Tower of Babel story, it doesn't say it outright, but later things will convey this, that Genesis 10 and 11 doesn't itself mention this, the allotment of spiritual rulers, right? Later passages in the Bible tell us something very important that happened behind the scenes when God scattered the nations from Babel. The scattering of the nations from Babel also included the assigning of the sons of God as governing stewards and spiritual rulers over the scattered nations. Out of this allotment, God focused his interactions with humanity upon a very specific family elected from the nations as his special allotment. It is through this chosen people that God continued to carry out his ultimate plan of redemption. It's the first time anyone's hearing of this. The allotment of spiritual authorities over other nations.
So there's one over the United States?
Interesting question. So the United States is a nation that is born after something happens that's important in history, which is Jesus. So you can't necessarily say that definitively from this story, is what I'm saying.
Okay, I have a question.
Yep.
So I see that word, right? Special allotment.
Mhm.
And what comes to mind is, like, I'm sure you guys have heard that, like, there's a lot of stories that like Jewish people are
Mhm.
behind like actually like a lot of the evil in the world.
Gotcha.
Because they think that they're special. They think that they're God's chosen ones.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you make of that when you read something like this?
Mhm.
And I mean, it's, you know,
There's a lot to be said there.
he's Jewish.
Uh-huh.
All that stuff.
So, a Jewish person does rule the world, and that person is Jesus. So I'll just say that. That's a very interesting point that you're bringing up. We can't get into that. We'll get into that probably more next week. I mean, I'll talk about it a little bit in a few minutes. The chosenness of the Jews is a significant part of the story, okay? And let me just get into the next slides, and hopefully it will answer your question, okay? Does that sound good? Okay. So the idea here is that I descend from like northwestern European nations, like Great Britain, okay? And at one point, going even further back, my ancestors came from Babel, and they migrated, and they were yoked to lesser deities, okay? Remember what we talked about? God gave them over, okay? They were yoked to lesser deities. So when the Most High apportioned the nations, he divided humankind. He fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the gods. The Lord's own portion was his people, Jacob his allotted share. So Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 and 9. This is that later passage that I was talking about. When the Most High apportioned the nations, when he divided humankind, he fixed the boundaries according to the number of the gods, the Elohim, or the sons of God. The Lord's portion was his people. Jacob was his allotted share. So Deuteronomy 4, verse 19, and when you look up to the heavens and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, and all the host of heaven, do not be led astray and bow down to them and serve them, things that the Lord God has allotted to all the peoples everywhere under heaven. Remember back in week 3, we talked about sort of these gods over nations, these national gods. So Roma is the god or goddess of the city of Rome. Athena is the god or goddess of the city of Athens, right? The idea of these representative figures over these different areas, okay? So when I say God gave them over in Romans chapter 1, that is what's happening in Deuteronomy 32, okay? That God allows humanity, he disperses humanity across the face of the earth, and he allots them spiritual rulers that are less than him. But he chooses one people, one family, and says, it is in this family that I'm going to reach everyone, okay? That I'm going to have a targeted approach through these individuals, okay? And then I'm going to reach everyone through it. I want to go to Psalm chapter 82. It's a very important psalm. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the orphan. Maintain the right of the lowly and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk around in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I say, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, you shall die like mortals and fall like any prince. And then this is the last and most important part. Rise up, O God, judge the earth, for all the nations belong to you. Okay? So how do we reconcile Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 and 9? God apportioned, when he divided humankind, he apportioned to them the gods, right? The spiritual beings. But rise up, O God, for all the nations belong to you.
Well, that first sentence, God has taken his place in the divine council in the midst of God. So it acknowledges that there's other lesser gods.
Right, lesser deities that are now humanity is given over to.
Yeah.
Okay? That's the point. Is throughout the Genesis 3 to 11, you've had God interacting with humanity in this collective way, right? And it continues to spiral out of control. Now he scatters them and gives them over, okay, to these lesser deities, to these powers and principalities. And then what does he do? He selects for himself. So number one, he apportioned all the nations for himself, and then he selected for himself a people. Okay? And it is through this people that all of the nations will ultimately be returned back to him. So this is an important meta story of the Bible that you have to understand, is when Jesus is resurrected, what does he say? All authority in heaven and on earth has given to me. Therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Okay? So do you understand what's going on here? Jesus says all authority is given to me. What does Satan tempt him with in the desert? Bow down to me and I will give you rule over the nations. When did Satan get the rule or the right of all the nations?
He doesn't.
He does because God gives them over. You see what I'm saying?
I'm confused. Did he give them over to the lesser gods or to Satan?
It's a conflated thing. So the separation of humanity from God is instigated and ultimately run by the satanic figure, individual. So the devil and his angels is another way that is. So these lesser deities, they side themselves with the serpent, you could say. That's a way of saying it.
I missed that.
Well, I haven't necessarily hit that point yet. Yeah, but you're bringing up a good question on that. Okay, so when he says all authority is given after this crucifixion and resurrection, it's a culmination of a lot of what's going on in the story of the prophecies leading up to the coming of the Messiah. That this Messiah figure is given authority over all creation, over all the nations of the world. Okay, so that's what's spoken of in all these passages throughout the Old Testament. So another verse that I just want to point you to, Acts 17, verses 30 and 31. Although God overlooked the periods of ignorance, now he commands everyone everywhere to repent, for the day of the Lord is coming. Okay? So this idea is Paul is preaching to the nations at this point about the Most High God, who at one time gave you over, right, to the futileness of your mind, to worship and serve created things, not the creator. Now, all authority has been given, therefore go and baptize the nations. And elsewhere, Ephesians chapter 6. Our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, the authorities, against cosmic powers of this present darkness, against spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. God is sovereign. Okay? Here's the point. God is sovereign. So how are we to how are we to do battle with authorities other than the Most High?
Through the Holy Spirit.
Yes, through the Holy Spirit, but I mean, how is that situation set up? Only because God hands them over to these lower deities. They're saying, you want to worship the lower deities? Fine, have them. Are you guys following me here? No? Kind of. There's a struggle. Okay.
Put the armor of God on.
Yeah. Let me go back so that I can explain from the beginning. I can explain from this. Okay. So when the Most High apportioned the nations, he divided humankind. He fixed the boundaries of the people according to the number of the gods. The Lord's allotment is Israel. Okay. So when we go into the next chapter, it talks about Abraham, and it says, I will make of you a great nation, a great family, and in you, he says of Abraham, in you, all the families, all the nations are going to be blessed. Okay? So in the chosen one, the selected individual, working with the Most High, all the nations are going to be blessed. Okay? So this is what Christ is. This is who Jesus is. In you, all humanity receives salvation. Okay? So what the people of Israel represent is they represent the chosenness of the chosen one, who is Christ. You see what I'm saying? Out of all the nations, Israel, and out of all of Israel, the Messiah, or David, and out of all the sons of David, Jesus. Okay? Who it is this perfect human being that secures salvation on behalf of everyone. Okay? But what happened, but you're talking about a God who is working in history, right? And throughout the story of time, and throughout the story of time, you have the giving over of humanity to the lesser deities, okay? But even from the very beginning, when he says to Abraham that you're my chosen one, he's saying to him, you're my chosen one, in that all the nations will receive restoration through you, okay? So I'm handing everyone over. I'm separating myself from humanity generally, corporately, but I'm selecting you as the chosen representative, the representative one, in whom everyone will be united back. Okay? So let me just present that to you here. After the consistent rebellion of humanity from the chapters 3 to 11, God disinherits humanity as a collective body. From this, God here, remember, the Most High, right? It's the same thing as saying humanity starts worshiping lower deities. It's the same moment at which the Most High disinherits humanity collectively, okay? From this point on in the story, God chooses to work with and through a specific family in order to bring out his ultimate plan of salvation and reclaim the world, okay? Not that he lost it, that he gave it over, and he will take it back again, okay? Enoch walked with God, Noah walked with God, and now from among the many nations, the Most High chooses a single couple, a new kind of Adam and Eve. Through the offspring of these chosen ones, the whole world will be given time, finally, the whole world will, given time, finally receive reconciliation to their Creator and restoration in him through the chosen one, okay? So here's my visual presentation of that. You have all the people congregated at Babel. Come, let us go down and confuse their language. Okay? You have the scattering, and you have the gods of Egypt, and the gods of Havilah, and the gods of Gomer, and the gods of Canaan, these powers and principalities that are assigned over them, okay? As lesser deities, right? You have Abram chosen from Babel, okay? That from him a people group will be generated, nation of Israel. And in the nation of Israel, all the nations will be grafted in, and therefore all the nations will be blessed. So it's a splitting and then a reunification, okay? It's a splitting as God works through the people and a reunification. And this is what happens time and again in the Bible. You could think another example of this is the creation of Eve, a splitting of Adam into the formation of two separate things, and then a unity in the one flesh, okay? And that honestly is a really good example between Jesus as the husband and who represents Israel, the fulfillment of Israel, and then all of humanity, which represents the fullness of humanity in Christ in humanity and humanity in Christ. Does that make sense, guys? So creation of humanity to Babylon is Adam and Eve. Garden exile is humanity to Babylon, and then Israel to Babylon. It's the same mirrored story. The point here is that we are going to find in that the chosen one, the Messiah, he will bring a solution to both of these things. Messiah comes through the chosen people, that God is working with his people throughout history to bring forth this chosen anointed Messiah. I know that was a lot, and I'm glad that you were giving me blank stares so that you could understand, so that you could communicate to me that we needed to sit on that for a little longer. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I really did. It's new to me, like when God, relinquished control to give it all to the lower deities. I really haven't thought about it that way.
Okay.
Like reading the scripture, I just thought he kind of stepped back, but still let people, have, autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
But then, when he did the Psalms 82, when he's in the divine council with the other gods, and be like, go have it. Yeah.
So there's a question about whether or not he intends for those gods to receive worship for themselves or not. Okay. I wouldn't say that he intends for them to receive worship for themselves, right? The point is that spiritual rebels reflect earthly rebels. Okay. And so the point at which humanities begin to worship their stewarding spirits, you could say,
Hey,
is
that book, Michael Heiser,
the unseen realm. Yeah, that's an interesting one.
off is like the Psalms 82.
Mm-hmm. You know, the point here is demonstrating the spiritual war that is the Great Commission. Okay, therefore go and baptize the nations. All authority is given to me. And we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but powers, rulers, authorities, principalities, right? These figures that have been appointed in the same way that humans have been appointed, right? The same way that humans have been appointed to rule, we go our own way. Spiritually speaking, spirits are appointed and they go their own way. Okay? So I think hopefully you get it.
So the story doesn't tell us when they went there.
Yeah, it doesn't say exactly. Deuteronomy 32 demonstrates this sense in which why do you judge unjustly, right? Is an important question. Sorry.
I just want to take one thing that kind of stuck out to me that I think is probably important to clarify is this word nations
Mhm.
we were talking about here. I tend to want to think of it as the ethnicities or the groups in that
Mhm.
sense, and not what we understand as a nation state today.
You're right.
Because nation state didn't exist then when they were talking about nations, so we have to kind of separate that understanding and think when God is saying the nations and the peoples, it's very different than the nation of Israel today. The nation state
Right.
of Israel today is not the
Mhm.
ethnic people of Israel of that day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good. In addressing his question, yeah. So that's something to say.
Could be broken down even further. Like nations is just like families.
Uh-huh.
Each families, even
Right.
outside of like the
Yeah, but not the
ethnicities.
nation state.
I think essentially what I want to get at is that there's a question as throughout the Bible as to why is Israel the only one in ancient history that is claiming that number one, their God is not a born God, is not a God who's given birth. Number two, that their God is not that their God is not only their God, it's their God, the God of Israel, but the God over all gods and all nations. And why does no other nation claim that in the Bible and in ancient history? You see what I'm saying? And the idea here is the Israelites are the ones who are claiming, who have the Most High God as their claimed God. You see what I'm saying? As a God, as a God that it says, I am that I am. It would be helpful to listen to week 3. If I have the gods of Egypt, they are localized deities to my nation. You see what I'm saying? None of the gods of Egypt I am claiming are gods of this other thing over here, this other nation. You see what I'm saying? They're the gods of the Nile, right? And the gods of these gods that manifest themselves and these powers that manifest themselves throughout the life of Egypt. You see what I'm saying? There are these lesser deities, these created things,
Buddhism doesn't talk. I don't know if you're speaking on that, but they don't. I mean,
Buddhism is not traditionally pagan in the way that I'm talking about.
Speaking of pagan religions.
It is pagan, but not in the sense of like Buddhism does not have a pantheon of gods.
Yeah, actually, maybe I misspoke. 'Cause I don't think Buddhism is actually considered a religion.
It is much more a philosophy. So then it is a practiced system of worship in the same way that Hinduism, which arises from the same region of the world, you could say, is a more proper, polytheistic religion of the idea of multiple gods and things like that. So, yeah, Hindus have a pantheon of gods. Sikhism is a modern religion. Sikhism is not an ancient.
As far as I know, they believe in the one God as well.
They probably do, but again, they arise, I think, like 500 years ago. Sikhs are not an ancient religion. Yeah. So, but the point is that when it comes to ancient cultures, the cultures in which the world is brought up in, or the Bible is brought up in, the Israelites are claiming that their God is the God of everything, whereas these other cultures do not have, and that their God, again, is eternally existent. These other cultures, they don't have that. And so how are we answering that question? And then how are we answering the question that most of humanity today worships the God of Israel, the God of Israel's scriptures, It's the story of God reclaiming those nations, at one point or another. So what has been presented in the Bible, humanity was meant to have a relationship with true God, right? With the Most High God, with the God of all, the God of being, the God of eternal existence. At some point or another, my ancestors localized their worship to a deity that was lesser than that, right? But God desires that I truly worship the true God. You see what I'm saying? That I truly worship him. So through the story of the Bible, through the scriptures, through the people of Israel, he has reclaimed, and through the Jewish man, Jesus, he has reclaimed me and my people. You see what I'm saying? At one point, he gave my people up. Now he has reclaimed me and my people. Does that make sense? So now I'm not worshiping some Celtic god and Celtic gods. You see what I'm saying? And doing dances around a fire and sacrificing to the Celtic gods. You see what I'm saying? I worship the man Jesus, who is God, who is the Jewish God incarnate. So anyway, does that make sense? It's the story of history is what we're getting at. I know that was confusing. Hopefully you were tracking with me. There will be more questions, but as we get into the story of Abraham, we'll flesh out that a bit more. Okay? Okay. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you.